You're listening to Searching for More, a podcast of the Diocese of Arlington. On this episode, Patrick Thompson, a parishioner at St. Agnes Catholic Church in Arlington, Virginia, talks about his draw to the Catholic faith and his experience leading up to being received into the church at the Easter Vigil Mass 4 years ago.
I'm not Catholic, and I'd like to be, and I've thought about this before, but here we're having this conversation now.
Hear Patrick talk about his daughter preparing for First Holy Communion and the impact it had on drawing him to the faith, as well as his deepening involvement in the church over the past few years. This episode's host is Billy Atwell, Chief Communications Officer of the Catholic Diocese of Arlington.
Patrick, thank you for joining me here on the podcast.
It's great to be here, Billy. Thanks for inviting me.
So you're a parishioner at St. Agnes Parish, and you converted to the faith a few years ago. So we want to dig into your story a little bit. So let's start kind of back from that point. What was your faith background growing up?
There wasn't a ton of church, and I'd be hard pressed to name any denomination per se, just general Christianity. And I would say it was probably more so for my older siblings. I'm the youngest of a big tranche of kids, but I went to a Christian preschool, and that was sort of my last regular Christian attendance.
Yeah. So growing up, when did you start having thoughts about Christian faith a little more deeply? Like, when did you become devout? Because typically people don't go from kind of lukewarm Protestant to Catholic. Like, they're pretty devout in what they believe, and it's that devotion that kind of leads them, to find the church.
It's hard to put my finger on it exactly, but my wife is Catholic, and she became Catholic in college or immediately after college, and we would occasionally go to church. And as a non-Catholic in a Catholic church, of course, you're never participating in communion, and that I always felt a little bit desirous of that. I was always the guy sitting in the pew when it would empty, and for me, I think a lot of it started with fatherhood and having a daughter, and trying to think of a good way to raise her. And the Catholic Church always felt comfortable to me. The structure of the Mass, the regularity of communion, it being the center of the Mass celebration, whereas, of course, other churches occasionally have communion. And I felt that the homilies were always much different than what you might see on TV on a Sunday morning.
Right.
No particular show in mind, but there's plenty out there. But the homily was always felt very educational and inspiring.
Very good. Very good. Now, growing up, were the sacraments a challenge? Because, sometimes some faith backgrounds, they don't have as much, like you said, communion is kind of a once in a while thing. Obviously, there's no confession or those kinds of things. Were the sacraments hard to adjust to? Even before you became Catholic, obviously you're going to Mass. Was that?
Well, you don't want to be the one who doesn't know what to say and when to say it. So there was certainly an attention to detail to make sure that I knew what to say and when. But it was just very comforting. And I think highlighted, this time last year or shortly after this time last year when Mass was no longer provided in person. Right. You really miss how that really facilitates worship, being in person and the sacraments and the cadence of the Mass. It's just much more impactful as an experience, especially when you're there, than when you're watching it streamed.
Well, was there a last straw for you where you said, okay, I've got to start RCIA, and really discerning that a little bit more? Yeah,
and going back to my reference of my daughter, so we, my wife and I wanted to raise her Catholic, and it's a good life structure, I think, and it's something I never had. I didn't do Sunday school per se. And so she was starting CCD and just kindergartner, and then a first grader, and we'd pick her up after Sunday school. And this is Father Edelson you'd go to church at 9, and then Sunday school would start at 10:10, and then he'd pick him up at 11:30 was the schedule. And so we'd pick her up, and she'd have observations or exciting things she wanted to share that I wasn't particularly familiar with, and as she started approaching First Communion, I thought, I'd like to be able to celebrate that sacrament as a family.
Yeah.
And that was really what led to my call. And I can go on. I don't know if you want to.
Yeah.
Sure. I made a call to the church, and I left a message, and Father Miserandino, Father Rich.
Yeah, I know Father Rich. Yeah, he's great.
If he's listening, just best homilies
He's a delightful
ever.
soul,
His ability to connect, and it's almost like it was designed just for me. That he was there, he returned my call. I mean, it's because I'll stream Saint Bernadette Mass when I know he's the celebrant, so I can hear his homily, because it's just I've always connected with his homilies. And so he called me back and invited me to come and meet. And at that time, I think RCIA had already started for a few weeks, and I felt that maybe I'd missed out. And he dashed off and grabbed several books and thrust them at me and said, come here next Monday or whatever it was. And yeah, it was he was huge. Just his welcomeness and my awkwardness about it all, kind of like, hey, I've been in the church a lot, but I'm not Catholic, and I'd like to be, and I've thought about this before, but here we're having this conversation now. And he was just so welcoming and encouraging and understanding in a way that it's just sort of his aura for anybody who knows him.
Now, when he gave you those resources to help you kind of catch up with the rest of the class, so to speak, was that encouraging for you, that he was eager to get you in? Was that the response you were looking for?
Yeah, and it was just sort of refreshing that it's not so rigid that it's exclusionary. It's welcoming in that it's encouraging. Come along. We can take care of this. Sort of.
You knew you weren't going to be alone in the process.
Yeah.
So what was RCIA like? You go to your first class, so you're a little behind. They've been there a few times. What was that first experience like for you?
It's well, first of all, I think. And I can't say because I've never done RCIA with a different group, but our group was just fantastic. And it was, I feel like it may have been a little bit larger, but we had people, husband and wife, mother, father, and children, older people, younger people. And it was just a real sense of community in there. So my first night I walk in and the room is packed, and this is a pretty small space at St. Agnes that serves multiple, like any church. You've got space, you try to use it as best you can. But I was thinking, wow, there's a lot of people here, and it turns out that night there was a group of parishioners that came, and they were praying for RCIA participants. And that was really fascinating. That I met somebody, Joan is her name, and that she was literally praying for somebody she's never met before. It was really a nice, supportive, comfortable feeling, and we've ended up having a nice relationship ever since. But it was just a great vibe, and Father Miserandino and Father Edelson would switch kind of week to week, and there was just it was just great as this group went on, building these relationships, culminating in First Communion, and I had actually everything that night. It was baptism, First Communion, and confirmation. So
that's very neat. One of I joke that converts usually make the best Catholics, both in devotion, because I feel like they have an appreciation for these things that folks like me that grew up in the faith take for granted. For them it's newer and refreshing, but also in that they know the foundations of what we believe sometimes better than cradle Catholics, because they learned it as adults, so they kind of took on some of the intellectual stuff. For those who grew up with the faith, sometimes you miss or you forget some of the really fundamentals. Do you ever go back in your mind to those classes, or maybe to some of those resources, and kind of like reinvest yourself in that?
Yes, and I think it was Father Edelson that talked about this as being kind of a lifelong adventure, that you'll continue to learn and discover about the faith. And that was nice, because on the one hand, it meant there wasn't a final exam you had to pass. That if you missed, a couple of key questions, you weren't in the group. But it was also, I think, nice that there was going to be continued opportunities in the future to learn and understand the faith more. And for me personally, Joan Beeler at St. Agnes is in charge of the lectors, and so I've since become a lector, and part of preparing for reading on any given Sunday is the lector's guide, and it not only has what you're to read, but gives you guidance on what it's all about. So that's really an opportunity, I think, to delve deeper into what you'll be reading and learning about that particular Sunday. And so it's a nice resource, and it also serves as an opportunity to think about the Mass upcoming well before Sunday morning or Saturday evening.
Yeah. So let's go to Easter, that Easter Vigil Mass. You're officially received into the church. You're an adult, so you fully appreciate, what you're entering. Talk about that experience, what that was like for you emotionally, but also with your family. Talk about that.
No, it was very cool. It was a beautiful evening, as springs in Washington tend to be.
Right.
And not having done this before, I don't know if this is a common thing, but Father Edelson had a fire that the Boy Scouts had built out in front of the parish, and it was a very long Mass. And I remember in preparation for that, at the time, I think my daughter was in first grade, we were going to arrange for a sitter, thinking, well, this is a long Mass, and we're going to be out till midnight. And it was really important for her to attend, and she powered through it. I think there were 13 readings for that particular Mass. But that was very nice that she wanted to share it. And her Sunday school class had actually made cards for me, and I'm sure some of the other RCIA folks. And seeing all of my other RCIA cohort there was very cool. And Father Adelson did a foot washing, which was impactful, and just to be up on the altar with my classmates was a nice journey. And even prior to that was the presentation to the bishop earlier in the year, and it was so nice to get to know these people and feel not alone. Not that you're alone, but when you're sort of the newbie, to know that there's others, kind of in a similar state of newness. And certainly there have been groups since that have now joined.
Yeah. How long was the process? How long is RCIA?
So I guess it was late September for me, but I think it starts earlier September. And then there was, of course, Easter Vigil, and I believe we went through the end of May to complete.
It's about 9 months,
yeah,
roughly. Wow. Okay. So when you think back, so how long ago was that for you now?
2016 and 2017,
okay,
I think it was.
So for about 5 years, 4 years. How have you grown since then? Like how has your faith life, kind of expanded from that starting point?
Yeah, so it's been nice as my daughter continues to grow and learn to do so with her. It's been something that has given me great calm and confidence in difficult times. And it's, I think, encouraged me not just to be a better person, spouse, father, friend, but to give to the church, from lecturing to, when we first started up last May, there was some, still are, of course, but, it was the adoption of rigorous sanitation measures to make sure the parishioners are safe. And so just knowing that you're going to stay after and wipe a bunch of pews down or clean here or clean there, just to make sure it all goes smoothly. It's and then I've since joined the Knights of Columbus, and they're of course very instrumental as a charitable organization. And my first time coming to this building was delivering masks last spring. So lovely people around the region would be making masks at home, and they would donate them, and Catholic Charities would facilitate that. So they'd need people to run around there were calls for people to bring food and help. I didn't do any of those, but I know that my brother Knights were certainly active on that, and it just makes you feel good to help the community.
So you're all in between the Knights of Columbus and lecturing.
It doesn't feel like an all in, and it doesn't feel like it was a rush, but it all sort of happened very organically, I think.
Yeah. How is the structure of the Mass and our liturgy? How is that worked for you? Because obviously that was a draw initially. How has that kind of fed your faith as you've gone on these last few years?
I think knowing what each Mass will bring is comforting, and I like how in the church there's the effort to stitch the other parts of the Bible together with the gospel, and as a non-Catholic, and before I became active in church at all, I just sort of assumed it was all kind of the same. There's a lot of sameness out there, but in the Catholic Church, the whatever the focus isn't the focus of Protestants. Of course, Easter is always a big thing, or Christmas, but it's the standard ordinary time, and that's interesting, and what's fascinating to me, especially in this time of change and upheaval, is the sort of rock that the church is. And our priests are just amazingly talented men, writing and speaking and counseling, and the knowledge that they have and how the church equips them for their service is just it's fascinating to me. And to think that you've got an institution, a 2,000-year-old institution like this, that is based on a continuous legacy to the apostles. It's nothing like it.
Yeah, that's very true. There's probably somebody listening or watching this on YouTube who is not Catholic, and they're listening or watching because they want to see the perspective of someone who came into the church that wasn't raised in the faith. If you were sitting with someone who's kind of on the fence, they're not sure, if they're going to do it. Like, what would be what would you say to them? What would you communicate that might encourage them to jump in?
Yeah, there's no commitment at first, right? It's you're. I don't think the church wants somebody who doesn't want to be part of the church.
That's
so
right, yeah.
if you're trying to see, hey, is this something that I'm comfortable with? Just try a bite. And there's no there's no contract you sign, or it's hey. This is a great resource for your life. It helps you live a better life, live a fuller life. And if that's something that's you want to try and see, hey, and maybe you'll be like me and find like it's almost like it was made to be that I joined the church at this time with these priests, with my family. Maybe it's your time.
Yeah.
And you won't know unless you try, of course.
Yeah, and I think some people also view RCIA like a moving train that you can't jump off, right? It's like, well, no, you can. And like I know people have gone through RCIA simply to understand their spouse's faith better. They're not Catholic and they don't have interest in it, but they go into it to learn what is it that my spouse believes and understands, because not every Catholic is able to articulate the teachings of the church as clearly as even they want to. So people will go and learn more about the faith that way. And there are people who go through RCIA and they decide, now's not the time. Maybe at some point, but now's not the time, and that's fine. It's not like there's going to be some disappointment. But if you are searching, you'll find it, right? And if you're going through RCIA, that's part of a search. It's not a definitive, you're signing a contract day one because we're expecting something of you. No, just be on the journey.
And I think to your point is it's not that you can't get off, but it's also that there's no deadline to get on.
Yeah, that's right.
And somebody might think, oh, it's September 15th and RCIA started and I can't. In my case, of course, I missed a few sessions and was welcomed with open arms. So, the lack of rigidity just take a step, give it a try. If it's a fit, if the mystery is interesting and unfolding to you, then it's obviously a good fit.
Yeah, and even if RCA isn't what someone wants to do, contacting your local parish, that pastor or parochial vicar, they're going to have resources for you, like you had from Father Rich. He had some books and things that he thought would be helpful for you, and in that case, catching you up. But if for somebody else, it might just be to introduce you to what it is that we believe and why we believe it. So, Patrick, thank you so much for telling us your story, for sharing it with us here. If we can ever do anything for you, let us know. But we're big fans of St. Agnes Parish, and there's a great community there. So thank you for your time.
Thanks for having me. Pleasure talking to you, Billy.
You too.
You're listening to Searching for More. If you enjoyed this podcast, please write a review on iTunes, Google Play, Stitcher, Spotify, or wherever you listen. Also, make sure you follow the Diocese and the Arlington Catholic Herald on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. And subscribe to our YouTube channels for regular videos that inspire, educate, and inform about the Catholic faith in our diocesan community.